Thank you. Everybody's speaking to time, which is wonderful. You have extra time. You have up to 10 minutes to respond if you want to use it.
Well, I probably will, because I'm probably going to cause huge upset by apparently I'm supposed to be controversial. So I'm going to start with the premise that, which may upset people in this room. I actually don't think there's very much wrong with the British press. I think we have a great press. I think we have very high standards. I think that the complainants mentioned in this paper, Rosie Waterhouse, David Collins, some of the people, Richard Pepiat, who complained about some of the things going on in their own organisations, are few and far between. I've been in national papers since 1988, and I've worked on the Sunday Times, the Independent on Sunday, Sunday Express, Daily Express, and the Observer, which is pretty much a cross-section. I've done investigations, I've done features, I've done interviews, I've done front-page stories, I've written editorials, I've done comments, and I can't think of any instance in that time where I've seen ethical standards slip. So I'm going to start from that premise. What we've got, how we've got into this situation is that a small group, and I mean small relative to the whole profession, the whole trade, I don't know if you can call it profession but trade, a small group of journalists indulged in something that was made illegal in 2000. Prior to 2000, by the way, it wasn't illegal to hack into people's phones. Post 2000 it was. They indulged in it because they thought it was a good way of finding stories. They knew what they were doing. They weren't particularly put under pressure by employers. They were under pressure to get stories, but they went along with that. They weren't objecting. They weren't blowing the whistle. And they've now got the full sanction of the criminal law against them. They should have had the full sanction of the criminal law thrown at them a lot earlier, probably in 2006 when it first became apparent. They didn't because their bosses were in cahoots with the police. That we now know. The police didn't investigate properly. The police thought it wasn't really a story, it wasn't worth looking at. And so by now, some of the people that you're reading about every day probably would be coming to the end of their sentences. And we probably wouldn't be sitting here agonising in the way we are. And what's happened with Leveson is that, and I wrote this in the Independent, I wrote the leader this week, can you imagine the upset there would have been if after the shootings in Londonderry in 1972, instead of ordering an inquiry into the shootings of Londonderry by the paratroopers, the then government asked Lord Savile to conduct an inquiry into the entire conduct of the British Army anywhere in the world. I imagine the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, and probably MPs small size would jump up and down and go mad, and a fair number of the public. That's exactly what's happened with Leveson. Leveson is being charged with looking at the entire ethics of the British press. That's what we're talking about now, really. It's got very little to do with phone hacking and a few rogue journalists. I just want to mention that, put it in context, because I think it's very important. I think we've all got extremely carried away with, we do have, and I keep repeating this, we do have a great press, and I include in that, it might not be to the taste of everybody in this room, but the Sun, the Mirror, the News of the World, for their audience, did a great job. Some people exceeded their remit, and they broke the law, and now the law is after them big time, and they're probably going to go to jail. So the law is working, finally. Nevertheless, I would say that, and I don't think this is particularly bad paper, but I just think it's parts overstated. But I would say, one other thing, we already have a right to reply. If a reader writes to me complaining about something, sorry, not a reader, if somebody we've written about contacts me and says, I want to write a reply, they will get a right of reply. It starts with the letters page. If it's worse than that, or it really demands a comment in their name, they will get the comment. We have a right to reply, we have the clarifications. And then ultimately, if they want and they're not happy, they can go to the PCC. And let's be honest, I live in fear of the PCC. The PCC is other editors sitting in judgment on me. Nobody likes having their peers sitting in judgment on their own behaviour and the behaviour of their paper. When the PCC hand down a ruling, we take it extremely seriously. We have to put it exactly where they tell us to. We have to put it in the form they do. And then ultimately and finally, there's libel law. And we have the strongest libel laws in the world, which is why people from other countries come here to use our libel laws. So the idea that there isn't a right to reply, I think, is frankly nonsense, which is not, by the way, what Leveson is about at all. And it's not what hacking is about. It's not about a right to reply. It's about some people indulging in phone hacking. Nevertheless, that all said, and I'll speed up a bit because I don't want to go over my time, I do think the PCC needs strengthening. I think every paper should be compelled to be in the PCC. At the moment, the Desmond papers aren't in it, which weakens the system. I don't agree with the idea that some people can be opt-in and others can opt-out. How do you compel all papers to be in the PCC? The fact is that at the moment all newspapers are exempt from VAT. HMRC manages to define what a newspaper is for the purposes of VAT. If they can define what a newspaper is, then surely we can define what a newspaper is, and they ought to be in it. It might require an Act of Parliament with a definition of a newspaper. All newspapers must be in the PCC. That's step one. Step two, the PCC code must be part of somebody's employment contract, or it must be a condition of their freelance work for the news organisation. Step three, if they break that PCC code, and if they're found to have broken the PCC code of ethics, it becomes a disciplinary matter. That means that they can then frankly lose their job, or in the case of a freelancer, they may not be paid, they may not be used again, and the PCC will make that ruling public. So anybody who then carries on employing that journalist without sanction won't be tied them. I mean, it doesn't look good, frankly. I might stop there because I've probably upset them. I just want to, my main message is to get across that, you know, we're sitting here discussing what's wrong with the British press. What was wrong with the British press was a small group of journalists at the News of the World, some of whom came from the Mirror to the News of the World, who indulged in phone hacking, the result of which we've got an inquiry. We've now got 13 inquiries, by the way, into what these people were doing. I'm not defending them at all. They deserve the whole law thrown at them. My point is, the law finally is being thrown at them. All that said, the PCC needs beefing up, and I do agree with Paul Dacre, whether it's a strengthened PCC or an ombudsman.
Today, Mr. Sherborne's statement at the Leveson inquiry, 3.5 hours, damning indictment of some of the tabloid excesses, and none of it, well, only part of it was to do with phone hacking. We had talk of people being forced into overdoses, into suicide attempts, because they felt that was related to the coverage and some of the harassment that was occurring because of tabloids. I think that the problem certainly extends further than hacking. When people are being moved to that sort of extremity of behaviour because of press, then there is a problem.
Well, then, rather than get us our direct response, let's get a number of views, and then I'll invite you to come back. Could you say who you are when you speak?
My name is Sabine McNeil, and one of my websites is called Publicity Online, and I want to salute you on your article, The Untold Story of Gagging Orders. I wear 3 gagging orders with pride, but only because I'm German. And I do risk prison, I'm told, but by papers that are falsified. And I wonder why the great British press doesn't pick up stories about the secrecy of family courts, about victims whose homes have been repossessed, who have been bankrupted through false documents, who are generally victims of white-collar crimes, even though the government took up the issue of white-collar crimes, wanted to take it up in its coalition program, but nothing is happening. My website, Victims Unite, has had over 70,000 hits, but I don't know how many press releases have been ignored by the great British press.
Thank you. Yeah, John Bailey. I'm most interested in Angela's comments about freedom of the press. I worked on almost every title in Fleet Street between 1964 and 1986 when Murdoch sacked me. I was merely a humble proofreader, but I saw the way in which those newspapers operated. And there was a culture of fear and bullying, particularly at the Sun, where I finished up. And in 1983, when we, the production chaplains, put forward the campaign for press and broadcasting freedom's right of reply, amongst our group, there was not one journalist. There was not one journalist who felt that he or she could face up to what we were asking for. And it seems to me that if there is to be freedom of the press, then it needs to come from the grassroots. I don't uphold what you said. When we went to see Shrewsbury, I think he was acting Sun editor at the time, with the Ben article, he said, "You're interfering with the freedom of the press." And I said, "Whose freedom?" And it was his freedom. There was no other freedom to be taken into account. So, although I hear what you say, and I understand things must be a whole lot better without nasty printers interfering with the highly principled approach that journalists have from what you tell me. But in those days, there was no sign of it, and I can't see any sign of it now. And when I look at the News of the World, and what I experienced at the News of the World, going right back to 1968, when Mike Gabbard was the features editor, a man who was famous for his sport activities on other newspapers, there was no sense of any great endeavour by journalists. I never saw any of that, and I was in the press room most of the time. So I'm a bit of a loss to understand what's changed, and how things are so much better, if there was nobody, no one at all, keeping a handle on what was happening in the press during my time.
I have two more contributions, and then we'll get a response. And the issue is not merely whether the British press has problems, but also the question of self-regulation and ethical regulation. So it's a response to the problems.
Nick called you Goldsmiths. No one disputes that there's a lot of great press, and indeed it was the Guardian that enabled these issues to be brought out so clearly. That's crucial. But nonetheless, trust in the press and trust in other aspects of media have been falling for many years, and they were around about 20% or lower even before this current scandal. So my question is, why is it that the case if we have such a great, unqualifiedly great press? And can a democracy be sustained with a press that isn't being trusted?